So I don't want to revisit the conversation from Drunk Tank Pink, but I do have to offer something that my wife said, which really helped me clarify what I did a very poor job of explaining regarding the blue light.
Okay, so we're going to go back to this now. Okay.
Just real quickly, because she said it way better than I did.
Okay.
And she said that color temperature is not color. This coming from a professional photographer. So
Okay.
I think if I were to, because I edited the episode, I go back and I listened to that and I wanted to take it out because it was a clumsy argument. I'm like, I'm just going to leave it in. I said all this stuff. I'm just going to throw it out there. And then she listened to it and she's like, yeah, that's what you were trying to say. So really the issue was not with the fact that color temperature can be used to control us, but just color temperature is not color, so it didn't fit in that section.
Okay.
Anyways, moving on, we got a couple other things here. No action items really to follow up with, although I do have some long-term follow-up with something that I did. And I do want to follow up with a couple different things that we need to talk about real quickly. Big shout out to everybody who has joined the Bookworm Premium membership.
No kidding.
Yeah, we've got quite a few people who have jumped on board. And like I said in the previous episode, speaking for Joe and myself, we really appreciate the fact that people are willing to put some money behind this thing. That really means a lot to us. So thank you, everybody who has done that. We're still working on adding some additional stuff to the membership, but right now there's all of the book notes and the wallpapers. I added 3 new mind map outlines for books that I read recently just the other day. So if you want to download that stuff, you can do that. And the URL, if you wanted to become a Bookworm Premium Club member, is bookworm.fm/membership, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes. Super grateful for everybody who's signed up for that. That's been, we've been watching some of those numbers tick up. It's it's been amazing to watch. So huge thank you to everybody that supported the show. I think, Mike, you and I kind of started that as, let's see if there's interest in supporting the show this way to try to help us keep the ads off the show. And so far, you guys are amazing and basically telling us, yes, absolutely, let's do this. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you to everybody who supports the show. And then, as we mentioned before, there's other ways you can support the show too. The links to the books in the book list on the website, those are Amazon affiliate links, so those help out. And then leaving a rating and review in iTunes also helps out. But the other thing that you can do to help out this show, and this isn't a major financial thing, but we do have Bookworm shirts that are available. And if you go to the URL, I don't know what it is off the top of my head, so we'll put it in the show notes. But the Bookworm shirts that are sold through Cotton Bureau are amazing. I'm wearing the Bookworm sweatshirt this time, Joe.
Sorry, I'm in a dress shirt.
That's all right. I'm covering.
I dressed
for you.
up for Bookworm.
Well, this is the comfiest sweatshirt I own, and we make a couple bucks off of every one of those shirts that is sold. So if you want to support the show, you can do that too. We'd also love to see you if you want to come to MacStock this summer. I will be presenting, and I'm going to be talking about achieving your writing goals using Ulysses. I helped put together the Learn Ulysses 2.0 course for the Suite Setup, did a lot of the screencasts for that. And so that seemed like a natural extension to talk about how people might use the tool Ulysses to finally write their book or achieve their writing goals. And since the theme is create, that's kind of the direction I'm taking with that. I know you're going to be there, Joe.
Yep.
Got a couple other people who are going to be there. And it's a really fun environment. Even if you're not an uber tech nerd, if you don't consider yourself a nerd at all, you're still going to have a good time. There's a lot of stuff that's there that regardless of your ability level, you will get something out of it. My wife is not techie at all, but she really enjoys it. She always learns something. And then you've got, the Mac Sparkies and the Stephen Hackett's, who actually they're going to be doing a live recording of Mac Power users there too. So it's going to be a great time. It's a small venue, a small group. It's growing every year, but it's still pretty small. And it's kind of nice because you can spend some time with people and have some quality interactions instead of just being, in this huge place with all these people and you feel like you don't really get to know anyone.
Right. Yeah, no, it's a pretty tight-knit group for the most part, but there's still there's new people that come every year, which is super fun. But yeah, to your point, it's continually growing each year. When is it? End of July this year. I think it's the last weekend in July. It's in
let me pull up the dates here.
Yeah, so it's in Woodstock, Illinois, which is always fun. I've got a Woodstock, Illinois shirt, which is entertaining to wear the real Woodstock shirt. People are like, wait, you're way too young for that.
Yeah, I love Woodstock. It's the place where they shot the movie Groundhog Day, and they've basically owned it and made like a walking tour and everything.
Right.
So it's a lot of fun. The dates are July 27th and 28th. And I've got a link, which if you were to use to register today, will get you an additional $10 off of the early bird ticket. So right now it is $179 for the 2-day pass. But if you use the code FOCUSED at checkout, you'll save an extra $10. And if you purchase a pass after that early bird pricing is gone, then that code will get you the early bird pricing of $179. So if you want to save a little bit of money, you can use the link in the show notes.
And you can't do this now, but they did do a Black Friday sale, which is when I got my ticket. So
True. Yeah, I actually bought mine Black Friday too, and then submitted for the.
They just refunded to you? Is that how they do
you
that?
had to refund me.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Well, you have. Yes, we expect to see everybody at MacStock. Everybody who listens to Bookworm, we'll see you at MacStock.
I'll have bookmarks. I'll have stickers. I'll have pins. I'm not sure what else I've got. Got a whole bunch of Bookworm stuff.
Pins? When do you get pins?
Sticker Mule has these offers where they'll try out a new product and they'll say, hey, you can get a bunch of these for a couple of bucks.
Okay.
And so they had pins and it was like $10 or something. So I got a bunch of pins.
So pins as in writing pins or?
Oh, pins like you pin on your backpack. The little
I totally want
circular
one of these.
button ones.
Those are great for like lapel pins on a suit coat.
Yeah, assuming you wear a suit coat, you could do that too.
I do that regularly. Come on. Now you're making me want to wear one to MacStock just to prove it to you.
Well, I'll bring some for you.
All right. Well, Mike, you have one long-term action item here that you brought up.
I do. This is from Digital Minimalism, I believe, but I had an action item to figure out my own low information diet. And I think that I have finally figured out how I'm going to do this.
Okay.
Actually I've done it. So I signed up for a service called Feedbin.
Feedbin.
The one with the little burger icon. It's $5 a month, but what it is it is an RSS feed. So kind of like I had been using Feed Wrangler, and that's $20 a year. And then Feedbin combines that with Instapaper and also gives you the ability to send an email from your inbox to an address, kind of like Instapaper did, and put it into your queue.
Okay.
So everything is all in one feed.
Sure. And
I'm eliminating basically Instapaper because that Instapaper would be pulled into the feed anyways. And I'm eliminating Feed Wrangler. And between the two of those, it's $50 a year. So I'm spending that $50 a year to get Feedbin. So I've just got the one service, and then I can forward emails, newsletters, things like that I want to read into there. But when I did that, I also went through and trimmed all of the sources that I was subscribed to in my RSS reader. So there were some things that were posting all the time, like I think Mac Rumors was on there, Mac Observer, where it's just too much information for me to keep up with. I like the stuff that they were sharing, but the really important stuff always surfaces somewhere else. So I basically cut the number of feeds that I was subscribed to in half when I signed up for Feedbin and had to transfer everything over. Now the goal is to just use the Reader app on my phone, preferably iPad or Mac because it syncs all those different places, and go through the news that way and not look at Twitter. Although Feedbin, I should say, can also pull in tweets if you wanted to have like a list or something that you wanted to show up as part of your news feed. But
and you can have that come in automatically.
Yeah. So basically the activity I'm trying to change is going to Twitter to see the news and just pulling the things that have the news that I actually want to read into my RSS reader, which is driven by Feedbin and is viewed in the Reader app. Hopefully in the morning on my iPad is how I really want to implement this, not on my phone.
Nice. That sounds like a pretty slick set, like a really smooth system there.
Well, I'm still making tweaks to it, but it seems to be working so far. I am pretty impressed with the email support, It does have like a bar on the side, which kind of bothers me, like the forwarded message. I'm not really sure a way to clean that up though without having to run a script, which I don't know how to do or what, like basically you hit the forward button in an email and it's going to show what part of the email is forwarded and then what part, if you wanted to add anything new, you put that at the top. It does a great job of rendering the forwarded email, but like I said, it does kind of shift everything over to the right and then it's got the little
quotes it
bar on the left. Yeah. And if I could get rid of that, that would be ideal, but I can live with it if it has to be.
You use MailMate, right?
I do.
I think there's a setting for indenting quotes on forwards and replies.
All right. You just created another action item for me.
There you go. I'm pretty sure there's a setting something like that does the indentation for quoting replies or forwards, or it's something along those lines.
There is a ridiculous number of options in MailMate, which I looked at initially and haven't touched for like 2 years.
Yeah.
Because there's just too many to think about.
Yeah, there's a lot there, for sure. Well, that sounds interesting, Mike. I hope it treats you well.
It's working so far. All right, should we talk about today's book?
Yeah, this will be a fun one.
All right, so today's book is Extreme Ownership. The subtitle is How U.S. Navy SEALs Lead and Win, and it's written by Jocko, Willink, and Leif Babin. I believe I'm pronouncing that.
I think it's Leif Babin, I think.
Okay, it could be. I knew someone who spelled their name that way, and it was Leif. So
Leif? Okay, maybe it is.
I guess that's just what I default to, but
I'm going to call them Willink and Babin.
I'm just going to call him Jocko. That's a fun name. But anyways, this is a book which has done pretty well. In the revised version I've got, it says #1 New York Times bestseller, and it was expanded, and it's got a couple different sections that the original one didn't, which makes it longer. I think we mentioned in the last podcast, it's like 300 something pages.
Yeah, it's pretty intense.
Definitely not a short read, but it's an entertaining read, and it's got an interesting format. It's basically broken down into the 3 sections, as you do.
Yep.
But then each chapter in those sections has a story at the beginning from their deployment in Iraq, and then a short section in the middle about the principle itself, and then the last part is a story about one of their consultations, because they have a leadership training company and they work with a lot of companies and organizations to develop leadership in the people that in their teams. So they share a story from their consulting that kind of illustrates the principle as well. So you get a lot of different ways that you could be applying it, which I think helps you realize the what's the word I'm looking for? Basically, like when you take something and you apply it to your own situation, I guess that would be generalizing something. So you're able to generalize the concepts because they give you like the different arenas that they could be exhibited in.
Yeah, I should also note that I didn't catch if they actually took turns, but they put their specific name on the chapters that they wrote.
That's true, yep.
Which was very interesting to me. A lot of times when you see co-authored books like this, you don't always know who wrote what section.
Yeah.
And they tend to work on it together. This is not like that. They've got Jocko's name on the front of the chapter of the one that he wrote. And I don't remember if they took turns back and forth on that. I didn't catch that part, but they did at least take the time to put the author of that section on the chapter title page, which I thought was very interesting. You don't normally see that. But it did help with the flow and the format of the whole thing, which the other thing I didn't notice was I sometimes had to go back and flip to the front of the chapter to figure out which one I was reading.
Yeah.
Just because they have such it's very similar in how they write. So it's not like you have a scenario where this chapter is different from that one and this one's written better than that one. I really didn't run across that at all. So kudos to them on working through to get that all done. But it was interesting to see, again, like to your point, the format of let's take a scenario that goes from the worst fights in Iraq and how do those translate into business scenarios. So it was very fascinating from that view.
And it's interesting because I feel like with Bookworm, what we do is we read these books, and maybe it's not a book that was written for people in our situation, but our goal every time is to get something from it and take the principle and apply it to our own life. And so that's kind of what they did with the structure that they use in this book. It kind of facilitates that. And so even if you are not enamored with the military culture, which obviously there is a lot of discussion of that, you can still get a lot out of this book, although that definitely comes through. And back to your point about who wrote what chapters, you're right. I noticed the names when I read through them, but I didn't end up actually going back to see who wrote a specific chapter as I was going through it. It was important, though, sometimes because like there was one chapter, which we'll get into, Leif was talking, and he was relaying a story of an order that he had gotten from his higher up, which happened to be Jocko. And that was important to the story that he was telling, was that chain of command and their positions relating to each other. So it was important that you knew that Leif was talking at that point instead of Jocko. But it is different because most of the books that we read, like you said, that have co-authors, it's just beginning to end sounds like one voice, one person.
Yep.
And so it's even hard. Like in the CMS that we have for releasing Bookworm, we have the name of the book, and then we have the author's name. We can't put more than one author's name.
Yeah.
And most of the time I'm just like, whatever. This other guy, I don't even know what he contributed because the first guy's the one telling all the stories anyways. But you can't do that with this book.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating though. So let's jump into part 1. We're not gonna run through every single chapter in the whole book. We've got some of them that we've selected that are the ones we'd rather spend some more time on. But yeah, it's split out into 3 different parts. Part 1 is winning the war within. Obviously, they're telling stories about combat scenarios. Neither Mike or I have military backgrounds.
Nope.
So keep that in mind. But winning the war within, everything has a military analogy to it. And the first chapter within part 1 is extreme ownership, where they go through the process of explaining what the mindset of extreme ownership is.
Yeah, and just to, I guess, set the tone for what to expect from this book, I'll just mention real briefly the story that they shared at the beginning. So I'm probably going to do a very poor job of summarizing this, but basically when they were in Iraq, they had to coordinate between the Navy SEALs, so that's the people who are writing this book, and then they were working and conducting missions with the Army and then also the Marines. And they had all of these different communication networks for the different branches of the military. And they had to make sure that they were able to communicate together to achieve the mission that they were, the outcome of the mission. And the beginning of this book starts with a story. I forget who specifically it was. It's one of the authors. They were in a situation where there was friendly fire, and blue on blue is what they called it. And they came back to camp and they were debriefing. And this is like a huge no-no. This never happens, So he's kind of like, well, what should I do? Should I figure out what went wrong and blame that person? And really what they did is they stood up in front of all of the higher ups who had flown in for this particular meeting. And he's like, it's my fault. And I think this was Jocko, if I remember right.
Yeah, it was Jocko.
Okay, so he basically said that saved his military career because they basically viewed his taking ownership of the situation as it wasn't going to happen again, and he was going to make the adjustments that were necessary. He wasn't going to throw somebody else under the bus, and that's the kind of leader that they wanted. But this really is a powerful idea for me. Now, I guess a little bit of context here. This extreme ownership idea is really the idea that everything is your fault. So if you are unhappy with your situation, you don't blame somebody else for creating it for you. You take ownership of it and you fix it yourself. I was talking to somebody who had read this book and actually mentioned it to me not too long ago, and they said that they actually have a new book out, which I believe is called The Dichotomy of Leadership. It's also the name of the last chapter. But it kind of tempers this whole idea of extreme ownership because people were taking this too far with their teams. They weren't letting other people take extreme ownership.
Right.
So we'll talk about that in a little bit here. But really the idea at the very beginning with this whole extreme ownership chapter is kind of the idea of personal responsibility, that everything that happens to you is your fault, which if you hear it through one lens seems completely unfair, but when you hear it through another perspective is actually very freeing and empowering, because it means that, yeah, maybe bad stuff happened, but it doesn't have to keep happening. You have the ability to impact the outcome based on the things that you do now. And that's very much in line with a lot of stuff that we've talked about on this podcast, but they take it to a whole nother level here.
I think I would maybe tweak that into just a slight degree and say it's not necessarily your fault, but it is your responsibility.
Sure.
To do something with it. Because fault, at least to me, is more of a what I did directly led to the result, and that may not be the case in this scenario. And in a lot of the stories that they tell, it's not that way. But I do think you have a strong responsibility to step up and take ownership of the situation and just take it from the stance of, the actions that I have performed may not have directly led to the result that I'm dealing with, the consequences of what I'm looking at, but they may have had an indirect result. This may be an indirect result of what I've done. I don't know if that's the same or if it's different, but it feels very different to me.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, and I think you are right that there is a difference there, that maybe what happened to you really wasn't anything of your doing. But I guess when I say calling everything your fault, really what that does is it sets you up for what you are able to do about it going forward. That's right. That's really where the ownership piece comes in. It's not looking back and projecting blame on what broke. And that's kind of the thing that they tell in the story too. Like, he could have gone back and identified different points where the people underneath him had messed up. And those things did contribute to the fact that they had friendly fire. But he basically wasn't willing to go there. And when asked, like, why did this happen? He just took the blame, even though he didn't have to, and say, it's my fault.
Right.
So I guess that's the thing I want to call out for people doing this or going through this book with us, is that you maybe don't have to assume responsibility for the things that have happened. But if you do, it gives you more options going forward. Is that a fair way to say it?
Yep. No, I think you're spot on there. Like, it again, like, you have to be the one that's willing to perform actions to rectify the situation.
Yep.
Like, that's ultimately what they're calling for. And that's the mindset that the rest of the book is based on. So chapter 1, extreme ownership. Every other chapter, every other part of the rest of the book builds on that foundation and kind of gives different scenarios where it comes about and what it looks like in given scenarios, which leads us right into chapter 2. And I think we're going to skip 3 and 4 to get into part 2. But the second chapter is No Bad Teams, Only Bad Leaders. And the story that he told here, I think, was just really interesting because they basically conducted an experiment on their own SEALs in training, and they had 4 teams. I don't understand what the training systems were, but I do know that they were broken apart into 4 teams. They each had a boat, and they had an entire series, like a course and obstacles and stuff they had to go through in order to get to a finish line. So there's a start line, there's a finish line. All 4 teams are in competition to get from one to the other.
Yeah.
And
if I could add a little bit of context here, I
go for
believe
it.
this is part of what they call Hell Week.
Yes.
And so the main objective of Hell Week is to get as many people to quit as possible.
Yes.
So
Yes.
the training that they're having to do is literally designed to wear them out. It's not designed to teach them a specific skill necessarily.
Correct.
So you have to understand the lens through which the people who are being asked to do these things are getting these instructions.
Yep.
And then one of the things they have to do is they have to basically take this boat as a team and carry it all over the place.
Which is crazy.
So it's like ridiculous stuff that you probably wouldn't do in combat, but you just have to do it because your higher up told you needed to do it, and you have to do it like 7 days in a row with getting no sleep.
Yes.
Which sounds horrible to me, but
72 hours, but yeah.
Yeah.
Is crazy. So the story goes that, and I'm going to blank on which team it was, but let's say it was Team 4 was winning repeatedly. And the thing is that if you win, you basically get a little bit of a respite while the other teams have to do like extra work, like extra physical training of some sort, extra PT. And Team 4 is winning repeatedly. So they're getting the breaks. They're in high spirits. They're, high-fiving, et cetera, et cetera. Team 2 is always in dead last, which is terrible because if you get last, you get extra, and then you're tired, and then you got to go right into the next race, which then they lose, which means they're doing extra exercises, which then makes them tired, which means in the next, you get the idea.
Yeah, it compounds.
So at one point, the officer in charge of the whole scenario takes the platoon leader, the guy who was in charge of each individual boats, and switches them. So now the leader from Team 4 that was winning all the time is now the leader of Team 2, which was losing all the time. And the loser from Team 2 is now the leader on the winning team of Team 4, which the leader from Team 2 now feels like he's won the lottery.
Yeah.
Because he gets to go to a team that's just dominating. The leader from Team 4 probably feels like he's out of luck. But the interesting thing is that on the next race, Team 2 won. So
yep.
The team that was losing repeatedly now won the race and proceeded to then win most races with Team 4 being right behind them. So the lesson there is that it's not a bad team. Team 2 was not a bad team. They just had a bad leader in that scenario. And there's all kinds of extra details that go with that of what made him a bad leader versus Team 4's leader and all those little pieces. But that was the general concept, is that the team won if they had a good leader ahead of them.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to go back because what really struck me from that story was the command coming from the leader for the boat leader crews to the leaders of the boat crews to switch. Because remember, every instruction that they are getting is basically to ride their nerves and to get them to say, I'm not putting up with this anymore.
Right.
Okay, so this guy who's the leader for the boat crew number 4 has been doing an excellent job. And at that point, when he's asked to take over the team that is dead last on every single race, he's got to be thinking, he's doing this just to annoy me.
Right.
Because he's not offering any other explanation for it, which would be my response to something like that is, well, I want to know why.
Yep.
But in that position, and this is where I think the military culture stuff, even though I don't have any experience, really fascinates me, because there are situations like that where you're not going to get an explanation. And maybe it's not fair, but there's nothing you can do about it,
right,
except go forward. And that's exactly what this guy did. Is he was a good leader, and really the lesson from this whole chapter, you kind of alluded to it, is that there are no bad teams, only bad leaders. As I was talking to my wife, who's going through this too, because I loved this book when I read it and was telling her some of the stuff that I was learning. She and I were talking about the other day, and I said, "There's no bad kids, only bad parents." It's the same principle, and that's where the ownership piece comes in, because good leaders, they talk about in this section, don't make excuses. They figure out a way to get it done. So the guy who came from the losing boat crew, he did win the lottery in an essence, because he wasn't a very good leader. He couldn't inspire his current team to achieve excellence. But when he got put on a team which was already excellent, he was able to maintain it, but he wasn't able to get the people around him to go to that level. That's really the challenge for me as I read this book. There's not a whole lot of action items that I have from this,
right?
But there's so much actionable stuff from this, not in the traditional sense of an action item, but things that challenge me to develop my skills as a leader. It's not the kind of thing where you can say, okay, I went and I did this, and now I can check the box and this is done. But this really helps paint a picture of what an effective leader is. And in fact, in this chapter, it's also where they say there are only two types of leaders, effective and ineffective.
Yeah.
So I want to be an effective leader. I want to be the leader of the boat crew who buoys everybody around him. Even if I got put on the losing team, they're not going to be losers for long, that I can inspire people to go higher, to become better. I'd like to think that in a small way, that's kind of what Bookworm does. As people listen to this, is that you're able to transcend your situation. That's kind of one of the reasons I really got into podcasts before I got into the online productivity world, was I wanted to be around people who were passionate about this stuff, Apple technology, productivity. I wanted to learn better ways of doing things. I wanted to become more effective. I wanted to become a better leader, and I didn't have a group where I lived that was like, hey, yeah, let's study leadership together.
Yeah.
But through the magic of technology, like, you can change your group just by changing the voices that you allow to speak into your life.
Right. So I think this is an interesting and humbling chapter if you are a leader. Like, okay, if the team's not performing well, guess whose fault that is? Yep. That's going to end up being me. Maybe not my fault, but my responsibility. See, even I use the wrong term sometime. So that's a piece that I think is very interesting. So two other chapters in this first part.
Yeah, let me just combine a point from number 3, because there was a story in here that really impacted me. And the story was basically that I forget the name, but the people who were deciding what missions were to be run had sent down this order. So it had gone to Jocko. Jocko had brought it to Leif, and Leif was supposed to bring it to his people. And on the surface, the order seemed kind of ridiculous. In fact, the Navy SEALs were upset because it looked like it put them in danger by doing these things. And so Leif's mad. He's talking to Jocko, and Jocko basically pushes back, and he's like, well, do you think they will want you to die? Like, well, no.
Yeah.
And so he basically taught Leif that it's his responsibility, when you don't understand the why behind something, to dig and figure it out. You have to get to the point, though, as an effective leader, where you believe in the mission. Because if you don't believe it, then you're not going to take the risks that are required to overcome the inevitable challenges that are going to be necessary to win. And I think that kind of goes along with the previous chapter of being an effective leader. You cannot be an effective leader if you are questioning your authority above you and trying to get the people below you to do that thing. And that's something that I've struggled with, and kind of what I'm realizing from going through this chapter. Let me just use like a church context as an example. My pastor's got a vision for where he wants our church to go, and there's elders and there's people underneath that, and there's the whole chain of command, And if he says, we got to do this, it'd be great if I had the full explanation as to why we should be doing that. But there are times when I just have to trust that he knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
And I got to understand that before I communicate it to the people below me, because they're watching me and they're looking at my reaction. And if I'm excited about this thing because I believe in it, they will be too. But if I present it as like, well, guys, I don't know why we're doing this, but you just got to do it. What do you think the result's going to be? It's going to fail.
Yeah. No, I think that's very true. And I see that in like even my own business. Like if the guys that do work for me, if they don't buy into everything we're doing, then I have not done my job. So yes, I'm with you. What's the other one here?
Check the ego is chapter 4. And if I were to summarize this chapter, it would basically be that ego clouds and disrupts everything. The planning process, the ability to take good advice, the ability to accept constructive criticism. So if you really want to be effective, you've got to be able to check your ego. In fact, the Navy SEALs have a goal, they say, to be confident but not cocky. Don't get complacent.
That's a good way to put it. So yes, believe, check the ego. Part 2. So this takes us from part 1, which is winning the war within, to part 2, laws of combat, which is very interesting as well. The first chapter in this section, I think we're going to spend time on number 8, but number 5 is cover and move. And if I had to summarize this from a business context, it would be to move into a new area or advance a product, stabilize it so that you can, build off of that, get it stable, and then move on to the next, as opposed to continuing to go after 3, 4, 5, 10 different things all at one time. Build one, stabilize it, move on to the next. Like that was the general concept I got from that chapter.
Yeah, well, I guess cover and move, there's a couple ways this could be applied, and the story that they told really kind of illustrated that. So they had a sniper team, and actually back up just a little bit, a lot of the missions that they ran in this city, I forget the name of the city that they were.
I think it's Ramadi, Ramadi.
I'll take your pronunciation of it. But the missions that they were running or executing, this is like the worst city there. And what they would do is they would just like charge into the middle of the city, take a stronghold, and then say, "We're here, do something about it." So they did that with one of their sniper teams, and then once they had accomplished their objective and they were going to go back to base, they were left with the option of, do we leave in the middle of the day when it's pretty dangerous, or do we wait until evening when the enemies had time to lay a trap for us? And they implemented cover and move and decided to leave in the middle of the day, which is basically kind of what it sounds like. You've got a whole bunch of people who are watching all the different angles, and then you work together to make sure that you're moving in the right direction. They eventually all get back to base, and they get back to base and they're celebrating that they made it, implementing cover and move, but they left the other sniper team out there. So the lesson from this is not just like cover and move within your own team, but how does your team or your department, if you were going to apply this in a business sense, it's got to be able to work together with all of the other teams or departments in order to achieve a singular purpose. And often small teams get so focused on their immediate tasks that they forget what other people are doing.
Right.
And that's challenging. I mean, it's a lot more work to figure out how all of the teams around you are doing things that might impact you and how you're helping them. But if you are looking at it from an organizational perspective where you can see the big picture, you can see how important this is.
Right. Yeah, and I would also note, like, sometimes this works business to business, too.
Yeah.
Sometimes businesses can cover each other and move their way through a scenario as well. So, yeah, it works on a lot of levels.
Yep. There's no us versus them.
Yep. Chapter 6 is simple. It's pretty simple.
I should probably mention that this is where my action item comes from, so maybe I should have bolded this one. There's really isn't a whole lot to talk about here, though. The basic idea is you get in that one-word title, just keep things as simple as you can. And the story that they tell from this chapter, they were working with some Iraqi soldiers who were on their side, and they were creating this big plan, and they're looking at it, and they're like, that is way too complex. You should just do this really little basic, simple thing. When he changed the plan on them, you could tell that they were kind of disappointed, but then they went out there and it's like 20 seconds later and they were in a firefight trying to save their lives. So after that point, they kind of got it. But this is something that I think I could do a better job in, not just generally simplifying my systems and my habits. Because you can have all these complex, intricate plans for how you're going to do things. But one of the things that they mention in this chapter, which really hit me, was the enemy gets a vote. So the enemy is going to do something to disrupt your plan, and you can define who your own enemy is. But if you've ever tried to plan out your entire day from beginning to end, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yes.
There's complexity, there's confusion, there's disaster. And when you make a plan too complex, you can't make the rapid adjustments as you go. And so I feel like I've done an okay job simplifying like my daily planning stuff. But when it comes to all the different systems that I have, all the different habits that I have, I kind of want to go back and look at all those things and figure out how can I make this even simpler.
Yeah, I gravitated towards this one pretty strongly. I didn't have an action item off of it, but I can definitely see how, like, I've been slowly working towards that this past probably 5 months of slowly cutting things out so that things are a lot more stable and simplified. So yes, I like this chapter.
Yeah, one of the things they say in this chapter, where'd that go? I just had it. When things go wrong, and they will go wrong, complexity compounds issues as they spiral into disaster.
Yes.
I mean, that could apply to a lot of different arenas, and you probably are picturing a scenario in your head where that has indeed happened. I know I am.
Yep. Maybe 3 or 4 scenarios.
Yeah, exactly.
But that brings us to chapter 7, which is prioritize and execute. You could probably guess that one. Like, when you have a whole bunch of things going on that all seem to need dealt with, they all seem super important, super urgent. The only thing you can do is determine which of those is the penultimate of importance and execute on that particular item. That's the gist of that whole chapter. Yeah.
There's a term from here called decisively engaged, which I liked. The term decisively engaged is a battle in which the unit locked in a tough combat situation cannot maneuver or extricate themselves. They must win. And so that kind of paints the picture for the military story that they tell. But prioritize and execute, one of the things that can get lost here is that there really is only one thing that you can do. I mean, you may have multiple options, but you're not trying to implement 4 different strategic objectives at once. You're trying to stay alive.
Yes.
So there is a very specific format, I guess, that they follow in order to do that, which I jotted this down in my notes. And again, this is actually one of the notes that I've uploaded to the Bookworm Club, so you can get this if you wanted to look at it. Evaluate the highest priority problem. Lay out in simple, clear, and concise terms the highest priority effort for your team. Develop and determine a solution. Seek input from key leaders and from the team where possible. Direct the execution of that solution, focusing all effort and resources towards this priority task. Move on to the next highest priority problem, and repeat. So there's basically 5 different steps there. And it sounds like maybe more than it really is, because sometimes you've got to go through all of this stuff super fast because the enemy is right there in your face and you just got to decide.
Right.
That's one of the things that they talk about. And this is something that I've dealt with, is like the paralysis by analysis. You just got to relax, look around, and make a call.
Yep. That's all you can do. And that brings us to chapter 8, decentralized command. Take a guess at that one. It's basically that you need to have the folks who are leading underneath of you, so your under leaders, they need to be able to make decisions and operate without without relying on every decision coming from you. So I kind of see this from a business scenario of, especially somebody who leads a web development company, is the people who work underneath of me. They need to be able to make day-to-day, almost week-to-week decisions about how things are built without needing to come to meet it for every scenario. They may have questions about which projects should be worked on or how they should be strategically placed, but they need to be able to make decisions on the ground about how things actually operate. And I can't say I'm always the best at allowing that. It's probably an area I could improve on, but the idea that the people who are under me are able to make decisions as well, it's pretty powerful, because it means that I'm able to get my head above water and think on a higher level, on a more strategic level, which is a lot of what they were getting at. As long as the people who were leading their platoons, who were in the field, the ones being shot at, if they're able to make decisions as things happen, their leaders are able to make higher level decisions about where to send certain troops and not be caught up in the details of which building is under fire. So it's a very helpful process of having people being able to make their own decisions.
Yeah, if you are not the best at this, then I'm just going to say that I'm the worst at this. I've always had trouble delegating. And this chapter, the reason I highlighted this, as we're going through all the other chapters and I've got something to say about all of them, I'm like, maybe I should have highlighted those. But now that we got in here, I realize why I highlighted this in the first place. It's because I really need to get better at this. I view the lessons for me from this chapter, though, specifically, and not that I'm even in a position to do this, but I guess I'm thinking back to all the times that I've struggled with this, and maybe it's the reason that I'm not in a position to do this is just the fact that I have trouble trusting that I'm going to delegate this thing to somebody and then believing that they're going to follow through and get it done, which is really what has to happen with decentralized command. Decentralized command is basically giving everybody below you the ability to make their own calls because you trust their judgment. In fact, one of the things that they mention here is that junior leaders must know that the boss will back them up, even if they make a decision that doesn't lead to the best outcome. And just being honest with myself here, this is not something that I have been good at. It's something that I aspire to. It's something that even before I read this book, I would like to say that, yes, I exhibit this, but as I take stock of my own situation, I realize that I do tend to look at things based on the lag measures or the results and then saying, well, good job, or you shouldn't have done that based off of that. Even in my parenting, like this is something that I need to get better at, is just giving people what they need, the parameters within which they can function, and then giving them the freedom to make their own decisions based on what they think is right. Now, in order to do that, a lot of communication has to happen. He mentions in this chapter also that every leader must understand not just what to do, but why they are doing it and the commander's intent. Okay, so this is where I kind of view like the Schmidt's Family core values that we've got, casting the vision for our family. Like this is our decision-making guidelines, our standard operating procedures, if you will. Like this is the parameters within which we're going to be making our decisions. But then there comes a point where my kids have to be able to make their own decisions, and they have to understand this stuff in order to make those decisions that are going to lead to a good life instead of the things that are going to get them off track and distracted. And ultimately they have to find their own path. I'm not saying that we're creating little Mike and Rachel clones and telling them exactly what they need to do. Like they're free to identify their own talents, their own abilities, and figure out the best way to do them. But ultimately, I mean, the faith-based productivity guy, right? So I want to help people connect to their calling, discover their destiny, live the life they were created for. Well, I got to do that with my kids, and I got to do that with everybody that is quote unquote underneath me. I don't like using that term, but I think it's the most appropriate based on like the whole idea of the chain of command and the military culture that this lesson comes from. Does that make sense?
It makes me happy that you used quote unquote.
I hesitated as I was doing it. I'm like,
Yes. I did not connect this to leading a family, the whole concept of decentralized command. I did not connect that to me leading my family. And
well, do you think I'm crazy for doing that?
No, it is humbling because it means that I have some more work to do. And I just hadn't thought about it. But as you're sitting here explaining that, it's like, okay. Oh, yeah, I should probably think this through because I haven't. And now I'm wondering if I'm doing a good job at that. And my surface level gut reaction to that is not even close. So
yep,
here we are.
Well,
thanks for that, Mike.
Sorry.
Appreciate that note.
Well, I only bring it up because I'm dealing with it myself. I mean, he mentions in this chapter, the solution to leaders who try to take on too much. Yep, that's me. Mike raised his hand. Is decentralized command. Like, you have to be able to delegate this stuff. And it's not just dumping a bunch of stuff on somebody else and saying, go do this. So in a family context, you've got in my situation, my wife and I, who are leading our family, I'm not above her necessarily, but we have to work together, and decentralized command I view as still a central piece of that. So it's not even just management up and down. I'd also say it's management left and right, where if you're trying to coordinate all of the efforts of your team, you have to be okay with not making every important decision, which I'm not.
Right.
So I gotta figure out a way to do that. I gotta quit micromanaging, you know?
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I'm gonna spend some time thinking that one through. So yes, that actually brings us to the end of part 2. So that is the laws of combat, and that brings us into part 3, sustaining victory. So just to follow that trajectory, winning the war within is part 1. Part 2 is the laws of combat, and then part 3 is sustaining victory. So you can kind of see the progression there of how to win the war through those laws of combat, and then once you've won the war, then what happens. And the first chapter of this section was plan, and as I was reading through this, I had a couple different scenarios that I was kind of taken aback by. One was I was completely unaware that combat leaders in the midst of war are using PowerPoint and email daily.
Yeah, that was wild.
I was so taken aback by that. It just caught me off guard. So once they explained it, it made perfect sense. But I was not expecting that at all. So anyway, that was one point. The second point was that as somebody who does quite a bit of planning, it helped me see that given combat scenarios, the importance of simplified and direct briefs, or what would you call that? Combat plan, combat order. They had an operation order. I forget what it was called. But anyway, seeing that the importance of that had a big impact on everyone who was involved made me wonder about my own briefs of sorts that I do with my team and how I go about conveying the strategic decisions that are being made by myself and passing them down to them. I don't do a real good job with that, but I also don't have an action item for it because I'm not sure what it means quite yet. So I do have a question out to the team that works for me, so just to see if they have feedback on it as to whether or not we're doing okay or not, but no responses there. Maybe that's an action item. It's just kind of, business operations is kind of what that is. But anyway, I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, the amount of planning that they do in PowerPoint is crazy. It definitely caught me off guard when they were explaining it, and how many hours went into that sort of thing before their missions got approved, and then they could communicate to their teams and they could execute them. But when you think about it, it does make sense. I mean, this is life and death, and they are in the worst possible situation that they could be in. They voluntarily go to the worst spot. So they got to be on their A game, and it's not just having a plan. Kind of the thing that stood out to me from this section was that a good plan isn't a plan that completely mitigates the risk. Like, you figure out a way to eliminate the risk, because there is always going to be risk. And they use a phrase, which I think I'd heard before, but those who will not risk cannot win. But the best teams employ constant analysis so that they can adapt their methods and they can put themselves in the position where they are most likely to win. And in order to do that, you have to evaluate all of the different options, and you have to recognize where things could go sideways and what risks you are up against. And I know from my own experience, whenever I have sat down and realistically spent time like thinking about what are the, SWOT analysis would be another version of this, I guess. What are the weaknesses or the threats to our business, bringing this into the business arena. When you identify those things, it's a lot easier to plan for those things happening. And then when those things do happen, it's no longer you're completely blindsided by this thing. You never saw it coming. You kind of know exactly what to do to roll with the punches. And yeah, you wish this hadn't had happened, but you're not completely thrown off course by it. That's the thing that really stood out to me from these stories that they were telling is they find themselves in these crazy situations where anybody else, and even the Iraqi soldiers who were fighting with them, like they're wide-eyed and they have no idea what to do. They're scared. But for the SEALs, it's just like a natural progression down an org chart, whereas, this happened, so I guess we got to do this now.
Right.
Right. And I do think that there's a ton of value from doing that, and that comes from spending some time thinking about the plans that you're trying to implement, not just saying, well, this is what I think I'm going to do, and hope for the best.
Now, some of the value of that planning, that leads us into chapter 10, which is leading up and down the chain.
I like this one.
And it was, I think this is very interesting because typically when we think about leadership, you typically see that as I'm putting together my plan and I'm making strategic decisions, and then it's my job to convey that down to the people who work underneath of me and work for me and make sure that the actions in order to drive that mission actually are accomplished. That's typically how we look at leadership, and they do talk about that. That's leading down the chain and making sure that people who are under you understand the mission and understand the simplicity of it, because you're making simple plans,
Mm-hmm.
So making sure that they understand that and that they are empowered to accomplish the tasks that you're setting out in front of them. The side of this that I found more of a challenge is the concept of leading up the chain.
Yeah.
And they told some stories around this with how people above them would ask a lot of questions and say, do you have this backup plan in place? And did you consider this? And like, of course, yes, we live and breathe this every day. Of course we thought about that. Why are you asking me this question? If you work in sales or you work in the field in any business, you've probably dealt with those questions from higher up. How many sales forces, raise your hand, how many sales forces badmouth corporate office left and right? That's common. It happens all the time. But the question that Jocko asked in the book around this is, why do you think they're asking those questions? Why do they keep requesting more information?
Yep.
Well, it's because I haven't been clear on what I've given them, so then they don't know all of the information. They don't know what's going on, so therefore they have to ask. So they are not empowered to make the decisions that they need to make, so therefore they're asking questions to get the information they need to make those decisions so that you can do your job. If you follow that whole chain of command. That whole concept was completely new to me. I've heard the concept of leading up the food chain, but I hadn't really seen it explained like that. So I really appreciated them tackling that one because it's definitely not talked about a lot.
Yeah, the story that they shared in that section was interesting. They had a couple different stories for this one because they're really tackling two different concepts here. So talking about, you were just mentioning leading up the chain of command, they realized from that story, if I'm remembering it right, that by bringing the person who was asking all of the questions to their position on the battlefield so they could see how they prepare and they recognize that this is the systems that they have in place, now they don't need to ask all those questions anymore, which is kind of interesting.
Right.
The point really from this is that leading up the chain takes more savvy and skill than leading down the chain, because when you lead down the chain, you can lean on your authority. When you're leading up the chain, you have to use influence, experience, knowledge, communication, and professionalism. You can't really make any mistakes because you're just going to get chewed out.
Right.
But it is possible to do that. And again, it comes down to the idea of extreme ownership. So I've been in that position where you're being asked to do something and you don't really understand why. And it's really frustrating. And in the past, I cannot say that I've always dug a little bit deeper and given my superior the benefit of the doubt. Although reading this, I definitely want to, and I want to figure out, how can I be a part of the solution rather than just saying, oh, they don't understand. Like, ultimately, that failure in understanding is a team failure, not an individual failure attributed to my leader.
Right.
And so
Right.
The ownership piece of this is, how do I fix the lines of communication so that everything is flowing freely? But the other part of this that really challenged me with leading down the chain is the story here being that Jocko didn't, or Leif didn't realize the impact of what they had done in Ramadi until Jocko showed him the before after slides from the PowerPoints, and Jocko at that point, kind of the light bulb went on, if Leif didn't really get it, how could he expect those below him to get it? So that insight into the bigger picture, unfortunately, for anybody in that position, does not automatically get passed to subordinate leaders who are quite rightly focused on the specifics of their jobs. So it's your job to cast that bigger vision, and their definition of leading down the chain of command here is like stepping out of the office and communicating face-to-face with your direct reports. You could apply this to a family too. Just because I hung core values on the wall doesn't mean that my kids are automatically going to get it. We still have to talk about it.
Right.
We still have to cast the vision for, this is who we are. This is what we do. These are how we make our decisions, how we live our life, the values that are going to direct us so that we are able to say that, yes, we have done everything we can to reach our full potential. That's challenging because there's no like point by point plan or formula for doing that. You got to be able to recognize when your people aren't really getting it and say the right thing at the right time in order to help them understand that. If Jocko doesn't have that before or after slide and he has to describe in words like we reduced, by 37%, whatever, like, does that mean anything?
Right.
Or is it worth the time to put together the PowerPoint slides so that people can see like the before and after? That's kind of the thing that stood out to me from this is like,
sure,
it's not just the fact that you're trying to communicate as a leader. You have to figure out the right way to communicate as a leader to cast the vision that you're trying to cast. The fact that you put forth some effort does not mean anything. People have to catch it.
Right. And that brings us to chapter 11 here, unless there's something else you wanted to say about this.
Nope. Although this is a really interesting chapter, like I said, because it's broken into those two different sections.
Yeah.
And so it feels kind of weird because we're talking about two different concepts in one chapter. But I think that if there was one chapter in the entire book that absolutely could apply to anybody's situation anywhere, it would be this one.
Right. It's so true because you're either at the top or you're not at the top.
Yeah. But there's something you can do no matter where you find yourself.
Exactly. So chapter 11, decisiveness amid uncertainty. And I'm going to summarize the main story on this one very quickly. If you've seen or heard of the movie American Sniper, I think that's what it was called, American Sniper.
Yep.
Chris, who's the sniper in that it's all based around, he actually was underneath of Jocko and Leif in their SEAL teams. So, put that whole picture together there for you. So Chris is on Overwatch, as they called it, to provide cover for some of the other troops that are on the ground. Leif is there as well. Chris is one of the best at identifying enemy soldiers, and of course one of the best snipers in the SEALs. He sees a man in a window that then retreats from a window and then goes behind a curtain. And then he sees him come out again and goes behind a curtain. And he can't necessarily say that this is the enemy, but he saw a man with a scoped rifle. So the concern is enemy sniper. And through a back and forth, one of the commanders who's on the ground, who they are providing cover for, they communicate back and forth with him saying, hey, in this particular building, say it's building 97, we saw this. Do you have any men there? No. The commander on the ground tells him, take him out. Like, you certainly don't want an enemy sniper above you. That is not a good scenario. Through a back and forth, Leif and Chris are uncomfortable in the scenario, decide not to take the shot because they can't say for certain that it is an enemy soldier. So they request the commander on the ground to go clear the building to make sure to take care of it. Through a back and forth, a lot of frustrations, the commander on the ground decides, yes, we'll go clear the building. As soon as the SEALs see the commander's troops come out of their building to go clear the building, they immediately call on the radio, get back in your building. Because what happened was they had identified the building wrong.
Yeah.
They had the wrong building. It was actually a friendly soldier that they were looking at in that building. They had determined that they were looking in the wrong place. So the concept of this chapter is making a decision even though you're uncertain. And in that case, Leif made the decision not to have the trigger pulled because he was uncertain of what was going on. And that concept is what this whole chapter floats around, of being willing to make a decision based on what you know, even though what you know may not be the full story, which is not simple. As someone who leads a web development company, I feel like I deal with this a lot. A lot of times you just have to make decisions whether you know the whole story or not, because guess what? Clients aren't always the best at telling you what they want. So you have the trouble of trying to translate a lot of times, but that's the idea of this particular chapter, though.
Yeah, this chapter made me uncomfortable because the whole idea is that you're never going to get all of the information, which I understand. And really the story, even the information that they received was telling them one thing, but it was kind of a gut reaction that they decided not to take the shot. So at what point, being the over-analytical questioner that I am, my brain immediately goes, okay, so where's the line?
Right.
Where do you just trust your gut and where do you just follow the data? And there really isn't a simple solution, and there's really nothing outlined in this chapter about how to do that. Really, they just give you permission to make those educated guesses based on an incomplete picture and tell you flat out that you're never going to get all of the information. There is no 100% right solution. Right. There's always going to be a little bit of, well, maybe we should have done the other thing. And as a leader, you can't deal with that. You can't be paralyzed by fear, because that's going to lead, or fear of making the wrong decision, I guess is kind of the thing that I'm speaking to from my situation, because that's just going to lead to inaction. Right.
Now, chapter 12, the dichotomy of leadership. You want to introduce this one?
This is an interesting one because, like I said at the beginning, they actually have a whole nother book devoted to this. And I haven't read that one, but the person who told me about it said they basically started off by saying, yeah, we apologize. We messed up with extreme ownership because everybody's trying to take this idea of extreme ownership to the extreme, and they don't allow anybody underneath them to take ownership of anything. So the dichotomy here is that there's two sides to this. And in this chapter, they talk about the two different sides of a lot of different things. I mentioned confident but not cocky, courageous but not foolhardy, competitive but a gracious loser, attentive to detail but not obsessed by them, strong but have endurance, be a leader and a follower, humble not passive. I mean, the list goes on. They also mentioned a good leader has nothing to prove but everything to prove. So this kind of is talking about how there are different times and situations where these different traits, which seem to be at odds with each other, are actually the right thing to do. But as it pertains to the dichotomy of leadership and the idea of extreme ownership specifically, I think the idea here is that you have to be able to recognize when you need to take extreme ownership for the situation, like Jocko did at the beginning when he said, it's my fault that we had friendly fire, and when to let the people below you take extreme ownership, because they mention that in the other book that kind of the stories that they heard from the business world, now that they have this consulting company and they work with these different companies and organizations, is they recognize that the leaders become the bottlenecks for these teams and organizations because they're trying to assume responsibility for everything. And then they come in and they're like, you got to quit doing that. And he's like, what are you talking about? I'm doing exactly what you said. I'm taking extreme ownership. They're like, yeah, but none of your people are. So
Right.
it's hurting your team or your organization ultimately. And this is something that is very difficult to do. And really the question in my mind is, okay, it's one thing to let people below you take extreme ownership when they are completely on board with the idea of extreme ownership. They've gone through like the military style training and they understand the idea, that's one thing. But what if they're not willing to take extreme ownership? Do you still give them the ability to do that so that they can fail? Or do you just say, I'm going to take care of this? And again, there's a whole bunch of nuance to every single situation where you can apply this. But again, it bothers me that there's no clear answer to this.
Yeah.
And it's something that I just need. I guess I'm challenged. I gotta study this out more.
Yeah, I think there's two things here that I noted. One is because I'm aware of them. Like, there's some feedback that to people who have read the book of like, well, you have to let people under you do this as well. Well, that would tell me that those who are taking that away from their underlings, and that's probably a bad word to use for that, the people who work under you, they didn't really catch Chapter 8, decentralized command. Like, to me, that's very important in that whole scheme of things. Like, that's a piece that you really can't let go, because you have to let them make mistakes and be willing to work through it as well. So that's kind of one piece. The second is they do tell stories of how like the chain of command does work in the SEALs, and how they do have platoon leaders and they do have folks that they at just various different levels. And they told a story at one point about how when they were in their own Hell Week, Jocko and Leif, when they were going through that training, I think it was Leif, his specific training, that there were members of his platoon at that time that they took ownership, like he and his team took ownership over their own outcomes and ended up carrying a couple people along the ride with them.
Yeah.
And he said that looking back, they probably shouldn't have made it into becoming a full SEAL.
Yep.
And obviously he's not going to say names in that scenario, but he felt like he carried people when they probably shouldn't have. I think that's some of what they're getting at here with this dichotomy of leadership. I've had to deal with that myself, with at what point do you have to say, I am going to step back and let you make decisions on your own and let you make mistakes and then let you deal with the consequences of them, and yet taking ownership for the decisions that they are making. Like, that's difficult. That is not simple. I think that's a lot of what they're getting at with this chapter. But they talk about how, like, you have to be confident, but you have to be humble. You have to be, they've got these back and forths that they go through. And it's not simple, but I do think that there's, what they're talking about is you don't always have to carry everything all the time. Now, I'm very curious to read the other book now. Yeah. I didn't know there was another book, but I knew there was a little bit of pushback against this one. I just don't. I personally don't see how they got to that point by reading this, because I can see the alternative here, but maybe that's just me. I'm usually pretty good at generalizing things.
Well, it kind of comes back to chapter 1, because they do say in chapter 1 that the mission is more important than an individual. And if an individual is not performing, the leader has to get them the resources or training that they need to be successful. And if they're still not successful, they have to get rid of them, because you're loyal to the team and the mission first. So I can definitely see where being so invested in wanting a single person to be successful, even when they don't want it for themselves, like that would be a difficult situation. But at some point you do have to say, I am going to go help these other people who are actually responding to the help that I can give them, because the mission demands it. And that's not easy. None of this stuff is easy. Leadership is not easy, which is why, even though we go through this book, and I know some of the other books that we've read, one of my criticisms has been, well, I have a lot more questions now. They didn't really give me any answers.
Sure.
This one doesn't give you a point-by-point plan to follow because leadership is not that simple. It's messy and it's complicated. But I also feel like the way that this book is laid out and the different things that they talk about and the different stories that they tell, they give you enough of the context where you understand the different tools that you need to have, and then it's still up to you when you need to employ the right tool. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think it makes a lot of sense because trying to lead teams is no simple matter, in generally speaking, though in their book they'll tend to use the phrase simple, not easy.
Yep.
Like it's not easy to go through each of these steps and do each of the things that they mention here, but they are simple principles.
Yeah.
They are.
Yeah, how they get applied maybe isn't so simple, but
Right. Right. So that said, you ready for action items?
I am. Yeah. So like I said, there's a bunch of stuff in here that I am definitely going to use and implement, but like I tried to explain in the last little bit there, I kind of view these as tools in a leadership toolbox where it's not something as simple as just do this now.
Right.
The one thing that I wrote down as an action item was to simplify my systems and habits, because that is something that's got a beginning and an ending associated with it,
right,
that I can check off on a list. But I will say that there is a ton of stuff that is in this book that even since I've read it, I've had it finished for, I think, 2 weeks at this point. If I were to look back over the last 2 weeks since I have read this and take stock of the conversations that I have had in my approach to doing things that I had done a certain way previously, this book's fingerprints are all over the place. So it was definitely an impactful book, and I want to just call that out because it can be easy to say, well, this thing doesn't have like a system that I can follow, so I'm not sure how this is actually impacting my life. For me, even though I've only got the one action item from this, it was definitely a very impactful book.
I don't have any action items on this one, which is kind of weird considering there's a number of things I've mentioned, like I could do this better, I could do that, or yeah, I'm not good at that at all. But I think they're talking about a mindset. This whole book is about the mindset of extreme ownership, and I most certainly have bought in on that. But I don't really know how to describe that as an action item. This is one of those, like, good to know, going to impact how I do things, but I don't know how to articulate how that's going to impact day-to-day pieces or even week-to-week pieces. So
yep.
I don't have action items here, but it's definitely impacted me in quite a few ways.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, number of action items does not equal impact from some of these books that we read.
Right.
And this was one. And again, I like the whole topic of leadership, but this really pushed all my buttons.
Sure. All right. So what'd you think of their style? How are you going to rate it?
I really like their style. I was a little bit concerned because I don't have any military experience. I do like the descriptions and the order and the systems that come with a lot of that culture, the chain of command, the honor that's associated with the way that the different branches of the military do things. I like the stories about the heroes. Ultimately, I think that's the thing that really resonates for me with this book is the whole reason that they were there. And they mention this multiple times while they are in there, is by their presence being in that city, it meant that X number of people stayed alive, X number of citizens, Iraqi police. That's how they measured the impact that they had there. It was nothing about they accomplished a mission. It was all about the impact that they had in other people's lives. So regardless of whether you identify with military culture or not, I really think that idea is at the heart of every person alive, is they want to leave a legacy and have an impact that goes beyond just themselves. And that's what this book is really great at doing, is inspiring and painting a picture of that type of impact that you can have. And I was a little bit concerned at the beginning that the military culture stuff would be, because that's their experience and kind of where this stuff is birthed out of, that it would be so strong, it'd be impossible to disconnect with that. But the way that they structured it, where they talk about the stories from their deployment and then the principle and then the business example, I felt like there's a ton of balance there. And even if you have no affinity for military culture or are completely turned off by that, there's still enough here that will give you stories and pictures of how you can implement this in your own situation. So the material, I thought, like the concepts that they talk about, the lessons that they taught, top notch. Like I mentioned, this has really been impactful for me in the last couple of weeks as I've been figuring out different ways that I've already applied this kind of subconsciously to my own life.
Right.
I bought several copies of this and gifted it to people because it had such an impact on me. And I knew like they're of the same mindset. They're big into developing their own leadership skills. Like this is going to speak to them as well. And so I think this book is easy to rate 5 stars, but I also can see where if you are not, maybe you're not all in with the concept of leadership, or you're a little bit bothered by this whole idea of extreme ownership, kind of like you were talking about at the beginning, Joe. I totally understand that side where you're in a situation where something happened to you that was completely unfair, and you have to suffer for it. I don't know what to say to you at that point because I'm not in that situation, other than I empathize with you. So I can see a situation where maybe people would be turned off by the tone of this book. But for people who have a growth mindset, who listen to this podcast, who want to take ownership of their situation and improve their tomorrow, I think that I would have no problems recommending this.
I have to say that there is a military history in my family, not in my immediate family, but I do have relatives who are either actively serving in the military or did previously in previous wars or within the last decade. So I don't have firsthand knowledge as like what it's like to be in the military, but I'm around it quite a bit. Just anytime my family gets together, it always comes up in some form or another. And reading books like this, I know, just being male, I'm drawn to war scenarios almost always intrigue me as a result of a simple Y chromosome, it seems. But this particular book, they do a fantastic job of explaining things. In the foreword for it, they even say that, because when I first picked it up, I was like, okay, they're going to tell a lot of war stories here. I wonder how they do for like censoring things and making sure they don't give things away, because they're pretty sensitive to that in military scenarios. And they do a good job of explaining how they did vet this book through some of the higher ups in the armed forces processes. So it has been vetted, but that was interesting and important, I think, especially to them. To spell it out. But they do a fantastic job of writing this. I was definitely intrigued by it. I had a hard time putting it down. It took me a little longer to get through just because I had some health issues that made it really hard for me to sit and read over the last 2 to 3 weeks. So I had a hard time getting through it for other reasons, but whenever I could get time to read, I just devoured this. So I'm with you. This is a 5-star book. The principles here are applicable in so many different scenarios. Really love this thing. Highly recommend it. Definitely a good one to go through. So we got a double 5, Mike. Good pick.
Actually, thanks to the Bookworm Club listeners for that one.
Speaking of picks, our upcoming books, the one that's up on the list for the next round is my choice. And I selected a book I've actually read before, called Quiet by Susan Cain. It's about introversion and working with or being an introvert. I've started going through this. Have you started this one yet, Mike?
I have not. Nope. I'm still going through one of my Gap books, which we'll get to in a second. But I am very much intrigued by by this book.
Yes. Having read it before, I know this will lead to some fun conversations because we're both introverts. At least I'm assuming you are, based on what I know of you.
Definitely.
So this will be a fun one to go through.
All right. I don't have a book yet, so we're going to do this live. I am going to go to the Bookworm Club.
Ooh. As in, like, right now, you have no idea what you're getting ready to pick.
Nope, I do not. So I'm going to go to the recommendations.
This will be fun.
And I'm going to sort by votes, and we're going to pick the thing at the top.
What happens if there's more than one at the top?
Well, there isn't. There's one, how to take smart notes.
How to take smart notes. Whoa, it's decidedly in the lead.
Yeah, exactly. Where's the author for this? So thank you, Gabby, for submitting this one. I saw this one come through before. Sanke Ahrens, I believe, is how you say the author's name. This is a really interesting book, basically on how to take better notes so you remember information better. So thanks, Gabby, for recommending this one, and this is the one we'll go through after Quiet by Susan Cain.
Interesting. That'll be kind of fun. That's kind of a cool way to do that. Just pick it while we're on the show. Cool.
That could have ended very badly, but
it could have. It definitely could have.
Don't guarantee I'm going to do that every time.
For Gap books, I don't have one. I mentioned I had some health stuff over the last 2 to 3 weeks. Made it hard to read, so I was doing good to get through our Bookworm book over this last round. So no Gap book for me. Sad day.
I've got a Gap book, and I've started this one. This is also a very long book. This was gifted to me by somebody, and it is Run for Your Life by Mark Cucuzella. It's basically a book on proper running form, and the argument that he makes for the tweaks to your running form that he outlines in this book is that there are cultures that do nothing but run for like days at a time, and they have no health issues. So we were literally made to run, but we do it wrong, which is why we hurt.
Interesting.
And I am getting ready to, as we record this, I believe it's 12 days until my half marathon.
Okay.
Last time I ran a half marathon, I hurt myself. So very timely, although this is more like a lifestyle book, and it's got a bunch of exercises and things that you do from going from this point forward, basically. So
sure,
I'm not going to be implementing everything from this by the time I run my half marathon, but there's a lot of compelling stuff in here for people who want to learn how to run without injuring yourself like I do.
Nice. That'll be interesting. Well, as you guys noticed, Mike picked a book live on the show through book recommendation that got a lot of votes. If you want your book to get to that point, maybe it'll get picked live on the show. You go to bookworm.fm/recommend, or just go to the club.bookworm.fm, join the club, and click on the recommend button in the top right, and that will take you to the form to fill out to create the book recommendation from there. But make sure that once you've done that, you click the vote button, okay? Once you hit submit, you create the topic for the recommendation, top left, hit the vote button. Just going to point that out. Also, if you want to see a list of all the books that we've already covered, bookworm.fm/list. That'll show you all the ones that have been covered. And you can also go to club.bookworm.fm as well to see all the books we've done, the ones that are recommended, and you can see that full list all together in one place from there.
All right. And you kind of mentioned the Bookworm Club already. So I will say, though, that you can join the Bookworm Club for free. You can support the show also by becoming a premium member, which gets you links to the mind map files that I create whenever I read a book. Some of them, like this one, are pretty crazy. So I'm getting ready to upload this one as soon as we get done recording. And if you also, a couple other ways you can support the show, the books that are on the list that Joe had mentioned at bookworm.fm/list, those are Amazon affiliate links. So if you decide to purchase a book and read along with us, use those links, gives us a little bit of spending money. So we appreciate that. And then also I want to put out the call again. It's been a while, I think, since I did this. I want to take down KCRW. So come on, people, join the revolution. Go into iTunes, search for Bookworm, and leave a rating and a review. I want Bookworm to be the number one return when people search for Bookworm on iTunes. We're already the number one return, at least for me, when I search for it in Overcast. But I want to see that happen in iTunes. I also want to see people share their own action items on the club. We've got a whole section devoted to this. People are chiming in and commenting on some of the stuff that we're posting, but if you want to just create your own thread for what you're going to be doing as you're reading through these books with us, feel free to do that. It's always more fun to go through this stuff together.
For sure. No, I think that would be a lot of fun. I haven't been real good about keeping mine up there, but that's for reasons I've already mentioned. So all of that said, if you are reading along, the next book that we're going to go through is Quiet by Susan Cain. And next time we'll talk about introversion. That'll be fun. We'll catch you next time.